The insult didn't come in a storm, it slipped out like steam from a kettle, soft, unnoticed at first, until it burned. "Don't stand behind me, Ma," Jeremy muttered, tapping away on his laptop at the kitchen island. "You'll jinx the connection again." I paused, coffee pot in hand. "Excuse me?" He didn't look up, just sighed through his nose. "Nothing. Never mind." But it wasn't nothing. I'd heard it. Clear as a church bell. I poured the coffee into my mug, slowly, careful not to spill. The morning sun streaked through the window above the sink, catching on the worn porcelain, the same mug I'd used since Jeremy was 10 and still called me Mommy. Now I was just Ma. Short, clipped, obligatory. Jeremy's wife, Callie, breezed into the kitchen moments later in her blush-pink yoga set, her ponytail bouncing like she was immune to gravity. "Wi-Fi's down again?" she asked, peering at his screen. "Probably because she walked in," he said, gesturing toward me, with his chin, still without looking up. Callie laughed. "Well, your mom does bring chaotic energy." They both chuckled, and I quietly pulled out the stool in the farthest corner. I held my mug with both hands like it might steady me, as though heat could replace dignity. That wasn't the first time they said something like that, but it was the first time it landed. I'd lived in their guest room for 14 months. After my lease ended and my pension didn't stretch the way it used to, Jeremy offered me the space. "It's just temporary," he'd said, his arm around me at Dad's funeral. "You shouldn't be alone right now." But temporary things have a way of souring when they overstay the comfort zone. At first, it was subtle. My framed photos misplaced during Callie's redecorating. The clock in the guest room that mysteriously stopped working the same day they installed a new smart hub in the hallway. My laundry folded too aggressively, like I'd made a mess just by washing it. Still, I stayed polite. I cooked dinner twice a week. I took care of their dog when they went to brunch. I watered the succulents no one cared about. I didn't expect medals, I just hoped for decency. What I didn't expect was to become a superstition. A week later, it got worse. They were hosting Callie's sister's baby shower. I offered to help in the kitchen, chop vegetables, arrange the cheese platter, but Callie waved me off with a tight smile. "Maybe just enjoy yourself today." Okay. So I stood quietly near the dining room, holding a sweating glass of lemonade, pretending not to notice how everyone talked around me like I was part of the wallpaper. I tried to make conversation with a woman named Bree, Callie's cousin or coworker. I couldn't remember which. "That's a beautiful necklace," I said, nodding toward the beaded pendant around her throat. She looked at me as if I'd asked her to help me rob a bank. "Thanks," she said, and then turned sharply to someone else. I smiled, as if rejection were just another dish to carry. And then came the accident. A little boy, Callie's nephew, ran into the edge of the dessert table. A tray of cupcakes toppled, frosting first, into the cream carpet. Callie's voice cut through the room like a scalpel. "Oh my God, was anyone watching him?" And Jeremy, eyes flashing, said too loudly, "She was standing right there." Everyone looked at me. The frosting was pink, the same color as Callie's dumb yoga outfit. No one asked if I was okay. No one asked the child if he was hurt. That night, after the guests left and silence returned like a familiar ache, Jeremy knocked on my door. I was folding the same cardigan I'd worn earlier, the one with the loose threads on the sleeves. He didn't come in. He just leaned against the frame. "Look, Ma," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "You've always had that thing. You know, with energy. Dad used to joke about it." I looked up. "What thing?" "Just stuff going wrong when you're around. You don't mean to." But he stopped, sighed. "Callie says you might be one of those, I don't know, emotional magnets or something." "I see," I said, even though I didn't. "No offense." "Of course not," I replied softly, folding the cardigan in half again. Then he left. The next morning, I bought a scratch-off ticket. I hadn't bought one in years. I used to get them on my birthday, a silly tradition my husband started. "One day, it'll hit," he'd say, grinning. "And when it does, we'll go to Scotland." He never made it to the airport. The ticket I bought was one of those glossy green kinds with gold letters, the kind that cost more than you should spend, but promise more than they'll ever deliver. I didn't scratch it. I tucked it into the recipe book I brought with me when I moved in between the pages of my apple crumble recipe. The ticket felt warm, and heavy, in my hand. Like possibility itself. I didn't want to scratch it. Not yet. It was mine. Just mine. Later that afternoon, I sat alone at the park with my book and a thermos of weak tea. Jeremy had suggested I get some air, and Callie seconded the motion with a loud yawn. So I left. The bench was old, paint chipped off like tired fingernails, and the air smelled of wet leaves and distant pretzels. That's when I noticed him. A young man, maybe late 20s, wiry, with a frayed backpack and scuffed boots. He was sitting on the opposite bench, carefully folding a paper napkin around what looked like a half-eaten sandwich. His eyes met mine. He smiled. It wasn't the forced kind. It was the kind people used before phones and indifference dulled everyone. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked. I blinked, then nodded, just thinking. "That's allowed," he said, and returned to folding his napkin with slow precision. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe the cold, maybe the bruise still blooming in my chest from the things my son wouldn't take back. But I reached into my bag, pulled out the unscratched lottery ticket, and held it out. "For you," I said. He looked at me, confused. "Are you sure?" "I haven't scratched it yet," I said. "Might be worth something. Might not, but I think you could use the hope more than me." He took it gently, like it was a feather, not cardboard. "Thank you," he said. "You have no idea." No, I did, and it felt like the first real thing I'd done in weeks. I didn't expect to see the young man again. Not really. People like him, those with torn sleeves and polite eyes, usually pass through life's cracks without making noise or ripples. He didn't even give me his name. He just took the ticket with both hands like I'd handed him something sacred. Maybe I had. I walked home that day, slower than usual. Not because I was tired, though I was, but because I needed the space between the park bench and Jeremy's front door. I needed those extra steps to prepare myself for the return, to become invisible again, to fold neatly back into a space I had paid nothing for but sacrificed everything in. When I stepped through the front door, the living room was dark, the curtains drawn, the smell of burnt takeout lingering in the air. Jeremy was on the couch, gaming headset on, half a slice of pizza glued to a paper plate on the coffee table. Callie wasn't home. He glanced at me, said nothing, then turned back to his screen. I closed the door softly and went straight to my room. That night, as I lay on the lumpy mattress, with the noise of Callie's TV show seeping through the wall, I thought about what the young man would find when he scratched that ticket. Probably nothing. A free ticket, at best. Maybe $5. But a piece of me hoped it would be more, not because I wanted anything from it, but because I wanted him to win. Just once, I wanted something good to land in the hands of someone who didn't already have too much. I fell asleep holding a pillow across my chest, as if it could hush the echo in my ribs. The next morning, the world shifted. Not in a big way, not in some exploding headline or thunderclap revelation, but in the quiet way that only matters to the person watching closely. It started with the voice message. I was in the kitchen, pouring water into the kettle, when my phone buzzed. One new voicemail. Unknown number. I hesitated, thumb hovering above the screen. Part of me assumed it was another scam call, the kind that said your warranty has expired, or press 1 to avoid arrest. But something told me to listen. So I did. "Hi. I hope this is the right number. This is the guy from the park. You gave me a scratcher yesterday. I don't even know how to say this, but you need to call me back. Please. It's important. I can meet you anywhere. I owe you a lot more than thanks." My heart jolted. I replayed the message twice, his voice shaky, stunned, barely containing something large and fast-moving. I called back. He picked up on the second ring. "I've been sitting at that same bench for the last hour," he said breathlessly. "I was hoping you'd come back." "I can meet you now," I said, already pulling my coat from the hook. "Give me 30 minutes. I didn't tell Jeremy or Callie where I was going. They wouldn't have cared. Or worse, they would have asked why I still had reasons to go anywhere. The air outside was crisp, the kind that bit into your nose and made your eyes water. My boots were old, the soles thinning, but they held up for the walk. When I reached the park, he was there, pacing near the bench, eyes darting every time a passerby came close. He spotted me and froze. "I've been going over how to say this," he said, walking up. "I still haven't figured it out." "Try anyway," I said gently. He pulled a folded newspaper from his coat pocket and handed it to me. My fingers trembled before I even opened it. Local man wins $2.7 million on scratch-off ticket. Says it was a gift from a stranger. There was a blurry photo of him holding the oversized check. Same backpack, same boots. I scratched it in the shelter bathroom, he said, voice hollow with awe. I thought it was a prank at first. I ran straight to the gas station to confirm. I didn't even believe the clerk when she screamed. I sat down slowly on the bench. My legs had turned to mist. He sat beside me, folding his hands between his knees. I don't know why you gave it to me, but I meant what I said. You changed my life, and I'm not keeping it all. You don't owe me anything, I said automatically. Maybe not, he said. But I'm still giving you something. I talked to a lawyer. I've already set up a private account in your name. You'll get a monthly deposit, enough for your own place. Maybe some travel, groceries that aren't on sale. I blinked fast. I don't have a bank account anymore. Just a pension card. I'll help set it up, he said. We'll do it together. This doesn't have to be complicated. I stared at him, at his wind-chapped cheeks, his shaking hands, his fierce sincerity. You don't even know my name. Doesn't matter, he said. You looked at me like I was human. That's enough. We sat there for a long while. The world moved around us, kids chasing pigeons, an old man walking a dog in circles, but we stayed still. Eventually, I told him my name. He told me his was Marcus. And from that moment, something in me began to mend. I returned to Jeremy's house before sunset. Callie was at the dining table with a glass of wine. She looked up, noticed the coat I wore, one Marcus had just bought me from a nearby shop, and frowned. That's new, she said, suspicious. Someone gave it to me, I said, walking past. In exchange for what? She muttered. I didn't answer. I was too tired for venom that didn't deserve reaction. I went to my room and opened the small notebook I kept hidden in the bottom drawer. A journal I hadn't touched in 6 years. I wrote down Marcus's name, the date, the phrase. I think today was the beginning of something. Then I closed it. It took Marcus less than 2 days to do what my own son hadn't done in years. He treated me like someone who mattered. He called a banker and helped me open an account in my name. Sat beside me, patiently, while I tried to recall the security questions I hadn't used in over a decade. He didn't flinch when I needed to borrow his reading glasses, and when I signed the final form, he looked me in the eye and said, "It's yours. Every cent. No one can touch it." I'd forgotten what that kind of dignity felt like. It wasn't just about the money, though I'd be lying if I said it didn't matter. It was about control, choice. The rare, precious freedom to decide where I went next, instead of waiting to be pushed there. By Thursday, I had enough in that account to afford my own place, should I want it. Marcus helped me look at listings on his phone. He even offered to co-sign, but I declined. If I've learned anything, I told him, it's that people change when your name's on their deed. He nodded slowly. Then let's find you one that has just yours. That same evening, I sat on the back porch of Jeremy's house, wrapped in a borrowed blanket and holding a mug of tea I'd made for myself. The stars were faint above the flickering porch light. The smell of reheated takeout leaked through the kitchen window. Inside, Callie's laughter floated above the hum of the dishwasher. Jeremy's low voice followed, tense, defensive, something about an overdraft fee and a package being stolen. They hadn't asked where I'd been, not when I came in later than usual, not when I brought in a brand new coat and left my worn one on the hook. It was easier for them not to notice me. But I noticed everything. The cracks in their perfect veneer were starting to show. The next morning I found Callie in the kitchen. She was barefoot, hair tied back, scrolling through her phone while biting into a banana. "You've been out a lot lately," she said casually, eyes still on the screen. I poured water into the kettle. "Just taking walks." "Nice coat," she added. "Designer?" "No," I said. "Gift." She raised an eyebrow. "From who?" "A stranger," I said without flinching. "A kind one." She blinked, then laughed. "Right. Well, just don't get scammed. Not everyone handing out kindness is doing it for free." I said nothing. I was done explaining myself to people who never really listened. That afternoon, I stopped by a small rental listing near a senior center. It wasn't much, just a studio above a closed-down barber shop, but the windows faced the sunrise, and the woman showing it to me offered tea before she even handed me the paperwork. I signed the lease that day, paid the deposit in full. She asked if I wanted to move in that weekend. No rush, I said. But I wasn't running away. I was stepping towards something else. That felt important to remember. I waited until Saturday morning to tell Jeremy. He was sitting at the dining table, scrolling through his phone with one hand and spooning cereal with the other. Callie was still in bed. I'll be moving out in a few days, I said, placing a small envelope beside his bowl. He glanced up. What? I found a place. It's close, clean, quiet. He blinked, caught off guard. You don't have to rush. I'm not, I said. I've taken my time. He pushed his spoon through the milk. You could have said something. I'm saying it now. He looked at the envelope. What's that? My forwarding address. And a photo of your father, the one you asked for last year. I don't want it to get left behind. He didn't pick it up. Are you mad at us? He asked quietly. I paused. I think I've stopped being mad. He didn't reply. The silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore, just final. Back in my room, I packed slowly. I didn't own much. A few sweaters. My recipe book. A carved wooden box that had once belonged to my mother. A stack of letters from people I hadn't spoken to in years. I didn't need them, but I liked remembering that I had once been someone people wrote to. I tucked everything into 2 canvas bags and set them by the door. Later that evening, I heard Callie arguing with Jeremy. Muffled words. Sharp edges. My name came up more than once, though I couldn't catch the context. I stayed in my room and listened to the heater hum. When I stepped out to get a glass of water, Callie was standing by the refrigerator. She didn't look at me, just said, "Guess we'll have more space now." I nodded. "Guess so," she added, more softly. "I hope it's what you really want." I looked her in the eye. It is. And for the first time since I moved in, she had nothing left to say. On my last morning in the house, I woke before the sun. I made coffee, buttered a slice of toast, and sat by the window watching light creep over the neighbors' rooftops. No one else was awake yet. It was the quietest the house had ever felt. I left a note on the fridge. Thank you for the roof. Even when it leaked. And I meant it. Sometimes gratitude doesn't mean approval. It just means closure. As I stepped out onto the front porch, bags over my shoulder, I saw Marcus waiting by the curb. His car was running, breath rising, in steam clouds. You sure you want help moving? He asked. I think it's okay to say yes to help now, I replied. He smiled. That's good, because I already brought snacks. We loaded my bags into the trunk. As we pulled away from the house, I didn't look back. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew I wouldn't miss it. The studio apartment smelled faintly of cedar and old lemon oil, like someone had tried to scrub away its past, but traces remained in the floorboards. The windows rattled a little in the wind, and the radiator coughed to life in unpredictable spurts. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I stood in the center of the room for a long time after Marcus left, not touching anything. The silence was loud in a way I hadn't felt in years, but it didn't carry judgment or unease. It was just space, unoccupied, unclaimed, and waiting. There was no television, no internet, just a twin bed, a chair by the window, a shelf with a crooked frame, and a kitchenette the size of a closet. I walked over to the small table and placed my mother's wooden box on it. It made a solid sound when it touched the surface. Familiar, grounding. I unpacked slowly that afternoon, not because I had much. 2 canvas bags don't hold a life, but because I wanted every item placed with intention. Each sweater, folded, reminded me of a different winter. Each dish towel had a history of hands and homes. It was like stitching myself back together. By sunset, the apartment had begun to look like someone lived there. A kettle on the stove, a scarf hung over the chair, a mug resting on the windowsill. I made soup from a can and ate it while watching the light fade across the rooftops. Outside, the streetlights blinked on, casting soft halos onto the sidewalk. I imagined other lives unfolding behind those neighboring windows, maybe quiet dinners, maybe loud arguments, maybe someone just like me, looking out and wondering if they'd done the right thing by walking away. That night, I slept fully clothed on top of the covers, with one lamp still on, and the red wool hat still snug on my head. Not because I was cold, but because it felt like armor. The next morning, I woke early. Not from an alarm, but from habit. I made tea, stood barefoot on the kitchen tile, and listened to the apartment creak around me as the sun warmed the edges of the window. For a moment, I imagined Jeremy in his kitchen, groggy and annoyed that I wasn't there to make coffee or take the dog out. Maybe Callie would comment on the silence. Maybe they'd notice it was comfortable now, not disrupted by the presence they claimed brought them bad luck. They probably wouldn't call, and I wouldn't answer, if they did. Not yet. After breakfast, I grabbed my coat, tied my scarf tight, and stepped outside. The wind had picked up, brushing cold against my cheeks, and sneaking down the collar of my coat. I walked without a clear destination, just letting my feet carry me down unfamiliar streets. It was freeing in a way I hadn't felt in years. No one waiting on me. No expectations to return. No eyes measuring my pace like it was a burden. I found a small market tucked between a laundromat and a florist. Inside, it was warm and cluttered with narrow aisles and faded linoleum. I picked out what I needed: bread, eggs, 2 apples, and a bag of tea. At the register, the cashier, an older man with thick glasses and a name tag that said Leon, looked at me and smiled. "Haven't seen you in here before," he said. "New in the neighborhood?" I nodded. "Just moved yesterday." "Well, welcome. We always have extra boxes by the door, if you need one." "Thank you," I said, surprised by how genuine it felt to be acknowledged. It wasn't grand, but it was kindness, and sometimes that's all a place needs to feel like a beginning. Back in the apartment, I placed the apples in a chipped blue bowl I'd brought with me, the same bowl I'd once used to teach Jeremy how to measure flour. It looked out of place on the shelf, too bright, too clean, but I liked that. It reminded me that not everything has to match to belong. That afternoon, I pulled out a notebook and began to write. Not a letter, not a list, just thoughts. Things I hadn't given voice to in years. Feelings I'd been too tired to carry and too scared to release. It wasn't poetry, just pieces of me I didn't want to lose again. Around 4, a knock came at the door, not loud, just 2 soft taps, and silence. I froze. No one knew I was here, not even my sister in Tallahassee. My address hadn't been posted or given. My lease was private. I approached the door slowly and peered through the peephole. "Marcus." I opened it. He stood with a brown paper bag in one hand and a sheepish grin on his face. "Didn't mean to startle you." "You didn't," I said, stepping aside. "Just not used to anyone knocking who isn't selling something." He chuckled and held up the bag. "I brought dinner. Thought we could break in your new place properly." I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either, and that was enough. We ate on the floor, cross-legged like kids at a picnic. Sandwiches wrapped in parchment, 2 bottles of root beer, and a slice of pecan pie that was just slightly too sweet. He asked about my son, and I told him the truth. Not out of bitterness, but because sometimes it feels good to finally say it all out loud. When he asked if I missed them, I paused. "I miss what I thought they were," I said, "but not who they showed me they'd become." He nodded like he understood more than he let on. After he left, I stood by the window, watching the street below. My breath fogged the glass slightly, and I traced a small shape into the condensation. A spiral. Not an end. Not a beginning. Just motion. The radiator clanked. The wind moaned. And inside, I felt a quiet I could finally call peace. 3 days after Marcus brought over the sandwiches and pie, I received my first piece of mail at the new place. It was tucked beneath the door, a slim white envelope with my full name written in pencil. No return address. I stood there for a long moment, just staring at it. I hadn't told anyone but Marcus where I lived. I hadn't updated the DMV or the Social Security office yet. It couldn't be a bill. It wasn't official. The handwriting looked nervous, slightly slanted. I opened it with the paring knife from the drawer. Inside was a folded sheet of notebook paper, lined, torn at the edges. "Mom, Callie told me where you moved. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. That's okay. But I had to try. Something happened, and I don't know what to do. Could you call me when you have time? Or stop by? It's not about money. It's about something else. I miss you. Jeremy." I read it 3 times. Then I sat down at the table and read it again. The letter didn't mention love. It didn't say sorry. It asked for something without giving anything first. I folded it back up and placed it under the wooden box on the shelf. That afternoon, I baked for the first time since moving in. It wasn't much, just cinnamon bread from an old recipe card I'd kept since 1986, but the scent filled the room in a way that made it feel more than temporary. I opened the window slightly, letting the breeze carry warmth into the hallway. I thought of Jeremy as a child, sitting on the counter licking the spoon. I thought of the night he told Callie I brought bad luck because his Bluetooth disconnected during a presentation. I pulled the bread out of the oven and let it rest. Some memories needed to be aired out too, before they turned sour. The next morning, Marcus texted, "You ever been to the pier? Sunrise is decent. I'll bring coffee." I hadn't. I said yes. He picked me up just after 6. The streets were still quiet. Early joggers zipped past like ghosts. He handed me a paper cup and didn't say much during the drive. The pier was mostly empty when we arrived, save for an older couple in matching windbreakers and a man fishing with a cooler beside him. We walked to the edge in silence. The sky was still holding on to the last shades of indigo. Waves moved gently below us, brushing the wooden pilings with the soft hush of repetition. Marcus leaned against the railing, sipping. "My mom used to come here when things got loud at home." I looked at him. He didn't elaborate. "She'd just sit and stare out at the water," he continued. "Said it made her feel like the world didn't need an answer from her." I smiled. She sounded wise. "She was tired," he said, looking down. "But she kept going." We stood there for a long time. I don't know if we were saying goodbye to something or waiting for something new to begin. When the sun finally cracked the horizon, it painted the water in gold and fire. The wind pulled at my scarf and made my eyes water, but I didn't blink. Some mornings aren't about clarity. They're about deciding not to turn away. Back at the apartment, the hallway smelled like someone's burnt rice and new paint. I stepped inside and checked the wooden box. The letter was still there, but I wasn't ready to answer it. Instead, I made a list. It started simple. Get a library card. Replace old winter boots. Frame Dad's photo. But then the list shifted. Write a letter back, even if never sent. Forgive without forgetting. Live like no one's watching, but you are. I closed the notebook and breathed in the still warm scent of cinnamon from yesterday. By Thursday, I'd found a rhythm. I started volunteering twice a week at the church down the block, sorting canned goods and restocking the shelves in their pantry. No one asked about my past, and I didn't offer it. It felt good to have purpose again, something beyond being tolerated. One afternoon, while shelving boxes of pasta, a young woman with a baby on her hip thanked me for finding her favorite brand. It was such a small moment, but it cracked something open in me. It wasn't gratitude I was used to, it was recognition. She saw me. And not as bad luck. That evening, I pulled out a fresh page from my notebook and began to write Jeremy a letter. Not for him to read, just for me to say, "Dear Jeremy, I did everything I knew how to do. I wasn't always right, and I know I wasn't perfect, but I stayed. Through your storms, through mine. I gave until I had nothing left to give. And when I needed you, you told the world I was cursed. Now I know it wasn't me. It was how you learned to handle discomfort, by finding someone to blame. I hope whatever this new emergency is, it isn't something that will teach you too late. I miss the boy you used to be. I hope he finds his way back to you. Mom." I folded the paper, slid it into an envelope, and tucked it behind the wooden box beside the first note. Some messages aren't meant to be sent, but they still need to be said. Later that night, as I sat by the window with my tea, Marcus sent another message. "Ever tried bowling? I've got coupons. Don't say no until you've worn ugly shoes." I laughed. Actually laughed. And I texted back, "Fine, but I'm keeping score. And I'm competitive." Outside, the streetlight flickered over the sidewalk. I pressed my hand to the glass again, but this time not to steady myself, just to feel the night. There was no music, no voices, just quiet. Not silence, but peace. And peace, I was learning, sounds like your own breath finally not apologizing for being there. It happened on a Tuesday, though it didn't feel like one. Tuesdays are quiet by nature. They don't carry the same momentum as Mondays or the gentle retreat of Fridays. But this particular Tuesday, had sharp edges before it even reached noon. I had just finished sweeping the hall outside my apartment when I heard it. Slow steps coming up the stairs, then a pause, like someone unsure if they'd come to the right place. I waited with my hand still resting on the broom handle, my breath caught somewhere between suspicion and curiosity. The knock came softly. 3 taps, not urgent, but intentional. I opened the door and blinked. Jeremy stood there. My son. Hair longer than I remembered, jaw tense. He looked older than 35, like the years had come in gusts instead of seasons. He smiled. It wasn't confident or warm. It was tight, pulled at the corners like he didn't know if he had the right to wear it. "Hi," he said. My fingers curled tighter around the broom. "I wasn't sure you'd be home." I didn't answer. I just stepped back enough for him to enter, if he chose. He did, cautiously. As if the floor might reject him, he scanned the room. It didn't take long. There wasn't much to see. "Nice place," he offered. "Smells like cinnamon." I closed the door behind him but stayed near it. My coat still hung on the hook, scarf slightly twisted from this morning's wind. The room suddenly felt smaller with him in it, like my air had been loaned out without warning. He sat at the small table, without asking. I didn't stop him. "I got your address from Callie," he said. She felt bad. Said, maybe I should try. I raised an eyebrow, but didn't interrupt. "I know it has been a lot," he continued, fingers drumming nervously on the tabletop. "I know I said some things I shouldn't have, and didn't say things I should have." I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Like sorry?" His eyes flicked up to mine. "Yes, that. I'm sorry." It didn't sound like a rehearsed line, it sounded like someone trying the shape of it for the first time. There was a long silence. The radiator hissed in the corner. A pigeon landed awkwardly on the windowsill and flapped once before flying off again. "I didn't come here for money," he said suddenly. "I know what it looked like." "Then why are you here?" He swallowed. "I came because Callie left." That landed like a dropped plate. "She took Marin, said she needed space, said I was too angry all the time, too distracted." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I've been staying with a friend. I don't know how to fix any of it." "And you thought I might?" He winced. "No, not really. I just didn't know who else to go to." I moved to the kitchen and poured him a glass of water. It was the only offering I could give that didn't require forgiveness. He accepted it, with both hands, like it might warm him. "I never believed you were bad luck," he said softly. "That's generous of you, considering how many times you said it." His mouth opened, then shut again. He stared at the water like it held answers. "I think I just needed to blame someone," he finally admitted. "And you were there. Easy, familiar." "That's the problem with old coats," I said. "People reach for them without thinking, then curse them when it rains." He let out a breath. "I've been going to a counselor, one of those free clinics." I nodded. "She said I should start by talking to the people I've hurt." I tilted my head. "And did you make a list?" "You were the first name." That I hadn't expected. I sat across from him, not close, not far, just enough space to decide who we were in this new chapter. "You know, when I left, I thought I'd feel lighter," I said, "but I didn't, not right away. I just felt untethered." "I get that," he said. "I feel it now." I studied his face. The boy I raised was still there, tucked beneath the stubble and hollow cheeks, hiding behind the noise life had layered over him. "I don't know what you expect from me," I said. "Nothing," he replied quickly. "Just, maybe coffee, sometime. A walk. A second chance." I stood and walked to the shelf, opened the wooden box and took out the letter I'd written, but never mailed. I handed it to him. He looked confused. "Read it later," I said. His eyes searched mine. "Is it going to make me cry?" "It might make you remember." He stood slowly, looked around one last time, like trying to memorize a place he didn't think he'd be welcomed into again. "I'm glad you're okay," he said. "Really?" "I'm not okay," I replied. "But I'm getting there. That counts." He nodded and opened the door. Just before stepping out, he turned back. "Mom?" he said. "Yes?" "You always made the cinnamon bread for me, didn't you?" "I made it for myself," I said. "You just happen to love it too." His smile was softer this time. Real. And then, he left. I stood by the door for a while after it closed, not because I expected him to knock again, but because part of me needed to mark the moment, to acknowledge the difference between being left and choosing to stay behind. When I turned, the apartment looked unchanged. But everything felt a little different. Not healed, but shifted. I poured the last of the tea into my cup, sat by the window, and unfolded a new piece of paper. This letter wouldn't be for Jeremy, or Marcus, or even myself. It would be for what came next. The cinnamon bread disappeared faster than I expected. Not because I ate it all, but because I gave it away. There's something about a fresh loaf on a cool day that makes people linger. It happened the following Thursday at the community pantry. I brought 2 small loaves, wrapped in parchment and tied with twine, not for any reason other than they'd make the room smell like memory. By the time I'd sorted the cereal boxes and stocked 5 shelves of soup, both loaves were gone. One to an elderly man with watery eyes and an accent I couldn't place. The other to a mother who said her daughter couldn't fall asleep without cinnamon in the house. They didn't thank me like I expected. They just held the bread like it meant something, and maybe it did. I walked home slower that evening, warmed more by that than the coat. Marcus stopped by that night, his head poking through the doorway before his voice did. "Smells like you're baking again," he said. I waved him in. 1 loaf for me, 1 for the building. I'm learning the names now. He leaned against the counter while I poured 2 mugs of tea. "That's dangerous, you know?" "What is?" "People getting used to kindness." I smiled. "Then, let them." He took the mug, tapped it gently to mine. "To dangerous women with ovens." That weekend, I wrote to my sister for the first time in 10 years. Nothing dramatic, just a card with a photo of the pier Marcus had given me. Inside, I wrote, "Not where I expected to end up, but better than I feared. Hope you're still making that gingerbread you used to hide from your husband. Love from the coast. Helen." I almost didn't sign it. Part of me still feared the silence that might come in return. But sending it felt like stitching something back together with hands that had finally stopped shaking. Sunday brought a light drizzle and a heavier decision. Jeremy texted me. "Maren asked about you. She remembers the song you made up about the moon. Said she wants to visit." I told her I'd ask. Just reading her name on the screen tightened something in my chest. I hadn't seen my granddaughter in almost a year. The last time, she'd worn ladybug wings and tried to feed me jelly beans through a straw. I didn't reply right away. I cleaned the counter, rearranged the bookshelf, and even scrubbed the baseboards before texting back. "She can visit. Just her, this time. I'll bake." Jeremy replied within seconds. "She'll be so excited. Thank you, Mom." That last word, Mom, sat strangely in the message, like a pebble worn smooth by tide, returned suddenly to shore. The day Maren visited was gray but dry. Marcus brought over a folding chair and a tin of colored pencils for her to draw with. "Kids like having their own supplies," he said. "Makes them feel like someone planned for them." He didn't stay, just handed me the items and said, "You've got this," before leaving with a wink. Maren arrived bundled in a navy coat with oversized mittens and a plastic crown nestled in her curls. "You live in a dollhouse," she said, stepping in wide-eyed. "Not quite," I replied, helping her out of her scarf. "But I did clean the crumbs off the windowsill just for you." She giggled and ran to the chair by the window. "Can I draw you?" "You can try," I said, sitting opposite her with the tin of pencils in reach. But no promises on staying still. She talked the whole time she sketched about her new school, about the missing tooth she hoped the fairy wouldn't miss, about a dream she had where I turned into a talking snowman. "I think you were nicer as a snowman," she said. "Then I must have melted too soon," I replied. When I pulled the bread from the oven, she clapped like it was magic. "Does it always smell like this in your house?" she asked. "Only when someone special visits." She beamed, cheeks pink and eyes too big for her face. We sat at the table and ate warm slices with butter, and she asked if I could teach her the moon song again. I sang it quietly. She sang louder. By the end, we were both laughing. After she left, the apartment was too quiet. I folded the crown she forgot and placed it on the shelf above the wooden box. Something to wait for. I looked at the drawing she made of me. My hair was a blue swirl and one eye was bigger than the other, but she'd written "Best Grandma" in rainbow letters across the bottom. I pinned it beside the window. Not everything had to be accurate to be true. The next morning, I called the landlord and asked about the unused storage room off the hallway. "It's just collecting dust," she said. "Why?" I told her I had an idea, something small, something useful. By Friday, Marcus had helped me clear the shelves. We swept the floor, strung some lights, and added a foldable table and an old radio. The next morning, I baked 3 loaves, laid them out with a sign that said, "Warm bread. No charge. If you need 2, take 2. If you need none, take a moment anyway." By noon, only crumbs remained, and the room didn't feel empty. The letter came again. This time, not slipped under the door, but properly delivered, with a stamp and a printed return address. Jeremy's. I found it late in the afternoon, wedged among grocery flyers and a dentist coupon I'd never use. My hands didn't tremble this time, but I still brought it inside and placed it unopened on the table, beside the last of the cinnamon loaf. I made tea, let it steep, sat down. Then I opened it. "Mom, I'm trying. I don't know if you see it or believe it, but I'm trying. I've been reading the letter you gave me, over and over. There are things in there I wish I could erase, but maybe they need to stay, so I don't forget what silence does to people like us. Marin talks about you like you're a character in a book. Part memory, part fairy tale. She draws your red hat in every picture now. I think it's her way of keeping you close. I'm not asking for us to fix everything. I'd like to come help you one morning. Maybe with the bread. I want to see what your world looks like now, if there's room for me in it. Love, Jeremy." I read it twice, then again, and once more after the tea went cold. I didn't know how to feel, grateful, hesitant, afraid I'd say yes and regret it, or say no and wonder forever. The following morning, I stood in the building's shared storage room, the one we'd turned into a small haven, and rearranged the folding table for what felt like the 20th time. The radio hummed from the shelf behind me, playing Billie Holiday through dust-heavy speakers. I wiped the edge of the sign again, though it didn't need it. I looked around at what had grown here. Loaves of bread on the table, a small thermos of coffee, 2 mismatched chairs someone had left behind. I'd taped drawings from the neighbors' children to the wall, crayon-colored hearts, stick figures smiling with far too large hands, gratitude, in wax and paper. It wasn't a business, it wasn't a charity, it was a choice, mine. That evening, Marcus stopped by with a tin of honey his sister had mailed him from Vermont. "Says it's supposed to be the good kind," he said, handing it over. "From bees that get to listen to classical music." I laughed. "Fancy bees. Only the most refined for Helen's bread room." He stepped inside and looked around. "You ever think about putting a bell on the door, so you hear people come in?" "I like the surprise," I said. "Lets me see who actually wants to be here, not just who wants to be seen." He nodded. "That's fair." Then he pulled a folded sheet from his jacket. I wrote something," he said, "for the bulletin board, if you want." I took it. "Read it. This room smells like healing. Like stories that didn't get told but got baked into crust anyway. Like someone stood in a kitchen, remembered their own name, and passed that memory on through flour and kindness." Memby, it stunned me. I looked up at him, eyes wider than I meant. "You can post it or toss it," he said, brushing it off. Just thought, well, it felt true. I pinned it up beside the sign without a word. The next morning, I texted Jeremy. 7:45. "You can come help with the folding and the flour. Bring an apron, and honesty." He replied. "I've got both. See you then." He arrived early. That surprised me. No Marin, just him. Nervous hands, worn jacket, and the exact same crooked smile he used to flash when he spilled juice on the couch as a kid. "You really bake it all here?" he asked, stepping into the warmth of the room. "Yes, in small batches, like trust." He laughed once, a short exhale. "Okay, teach me." We didn't talk much while we worked. I handed him ingredients, corrected his dough rolling technique, watched him fumble with measuring spoons. But he didn't rush. He asked questions. He wiped the counter when he spilled. He even sang under his breath. Something low and familiar, a tune from years ago. We got through 4 loaves by 9. He helped label each one, folded parchment, tied twine. He didn't try to apologize again. He didn't bring up the past. But he stayed. And that counted for something. At 10, a woman from the building came in for bread. She saw Jeremy and paused. "Is he the one who smells like cinnamon and regret?" she asked playfully. Jeremy froze. "Uncertain," I answered. He's new. Learning the recipe. She nodded. Well, he's got a good teacher. After she left, Jeremy turned to me. You told them about me? No. But kindness leaves a scent. People can tell when it's fresh. When the last loaf was gone and the room quiet again, Jeremy took a seat. Can I come again next week? He asked. Not just for Marin, for me. I looked at him, my hands dusted with flour, my heart strangely calm. You can come if you bring more than guilt, I said. Bring your whole self next time. He nodded. Deal. Then he stood, pressed a hand to his chest, and said, thank you. I didn't reply, just watched him walk out, this time without the weight I remembered. Back in the apartment, I sat by the window with the tin of honey in my lap. I made toast, drizzled the golden syrup across it, and tasted it with closed eyes. It was the good kind. It was the kind of cold that made breath visible, even indoors, the kind that crept in through window seams and made radiators groan in protest. I had baked early that morning, apple and walnut this time, something richer, denser. The scent wrapped itself around the little bread room like a scarf. Jeremy was due to arrive at 8 a.m., but by 7:50 I had already arranged the loaves and filled the thermos with fresh coffee. But at 7:55, it wasn't Jeremy who appeared. She walked in slowly, cautious but not timid. Mid-30s, maybe. Her cheeks red from wind, her coat threadbare and 2 sizes too large. A scarf, wool green and unraveling at one end, was looped twice around her neck. I'd never seen her before. She didn't reach for the bread, just stood there, staring at the table. Take one if you'd like, I said gently, stepping away from the counter. She didn't move, just whispered, Are you Helen? I paused. Yes. She nodded, then exhaled, as if she'd been holding her breath for miles. Her hands clutched her coat sleeves, knuckles white. I think you knew my mother. That wasn't what I expected to hear before sunrise. She told me her name, Delia, and the moment she said it, a memory unfurled in my chest, like a folded map I hadn't opened in years. Her mother had been Gloria. We'd worked together in the library nearly 25 years ago, shelving books and whispering about poetry when no one was around. Gloria had loved checkered skirts and humming gospel under her breath. We'd lost touch after I left the county job. I didn't know she'd passed. She always talked about you, Delia said, her eyes damp now. Said you were the only one who really saw her. I blinked hard and invited her to sit. She died last March, Delia said, gripping the cup of coffee I handed her. Lung cancer. It was fast. She left me this. She fished into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was one of my old recipe cards, cinnamon bread, written in my handwriting. She kept this, Delia whispered, taped it inside the cupboard, said it reminded her of home, said you gave it to her when she was having one of her bad days. I remembered Gloria crying behind the stacks, the card pulled from my purse without a second thought, a small act I had long forgotten. Gloria hadn't. I came here because I didn't know where else to go, Delia continued. I don't know why, but when I heard your name, when someone in the building mentioned the bread woman, I just followed it. Her voice cracked on the word followed. I set another mug down for her and sat across the table, hands folded. I'm glad you did, I said. Your mother was good, even when the world didn't treat her like it. Delia nodded quickly, like affirmation, hurt less than silence. Are you okay? I asked, not out of politeness, but because I needed to know. She didn't answer, but her shoulders dropped slightly. I've got a little girl, she said finally, and I'm trying. God, I'm trying. But rent's behind, and her school needs supplies, and the food bank line this morning was 4 blocks long. You're not here for pity, I said. She shook her head. I'm here because I wanted to remember someone who had hope, even when she didn't say it out loud. I looked at her, at the scarf, the chapped lips, the weight of motherhood pressed into her spine. And then, for the first time in a long while, I made a decision before thinking it through. I walked back to the apartment and opened the drawer where I kept the lottery ticket. Yes, that ticket. I had bought it the day after I left Jeremy's house. It was just an impulse, at the time. A small rebellion at a corner store, a woman in a red hat handing over crumpled bills for a 1 in a million chance. I'd tucked it away, untouched, unread. I hadn't had the stomach to check it, not out of superstition, but because I'd told myself I didn't need luck anymore. But standing there, fingers curled around the edge of the drawer, I realized something. Maybe that ticket was never for me. I brought it back to the bedroom and handed it to Delia. Her brow furrowed. "What's this?" "A lottery ticket," I said. Her hands trembled as she took it. "But I can't." "You can," I interrupted, "because sometimes the world gives something to the wrong person on purpose, just so they can pass it to the right one." She stared at it, like it was glowing. "I haven't checked it," I said. "I don't even care if it's worth $5 or 5,000. Just promise me, if it brings you anything, you'll keep passing it forward." She nodded, eyes glossy. "I will. I swear." She stood slowly, as if leaving too fast would break the moment. Just before walking out, she looked at me again. "My mother would have said this was fate," she whispered. "No," I replied. "Just a recipe, a room, and a scarf." After she left, I sat at the table and finally let the silence settle. Not the lonely kind. The kind that comes after doing something that mattered. Jeremy showed up 10 minutes later. He looked around, confused. "You all right?" I nodded. "I just gave away a lottery ticket to someone who needed it more than I ever would." He smiled, confused, but proud. "Was it the big kind?" "Doesn't matter," I said. "The giving was the winning." The bread room was quiet when she returned. I was slicing into a warm cranberry walnut loaf, steam rising like a secret when the door creaked open behind me. I didn't turn right away. I'd grown used to footsteps, to pauses that ended in silence. But these didn't. They moved forward, steady but hesitant. "Excuse me?" a voice said, softer than I remembered. I looked up, knife still in hand. It was Delia. Only this time, she wasn't alone. A little girl stood beside her, one mittened hand wrapped around her mother's coat pocket, the other clinging to a drawing rolled up like a scroll. "She insisted," Delia said, her smile cautious but real. "She wanted to thank the lady who gave us magic." I blinked hard. "Come in," I said, clearing the table with a cloth. "It smells like bread, but don't be fooled, kindness is the real recipe." The little girl giggled and peeked around the corner at the loaves lined up like treasures on a shelf. "I'm Lena," she said proudly, pushing the drawing into my hand. "I made this for you. It's your hat. And the bread. And my mom's smiling." I unrolled the paper. Her version of me had enormous blue eyes and floating gray curls like clouds, but the red hat was unmistakable. "It's perfect," I said, placing it on the wall beside the others. "Now I'm officially famous." Delia took her usual seat, the one by the window, and cupped the mug of tea. I poured her as if it were a small animal. She needed to keep alive. "I didn't come just to say thank you," she said once Lena had nestled into a corner with a crayon tin. "I came to tell you what the ticket did." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. "It didn't make us rich," she said, "but it made us stable, and I think that's rarer." They paid off the arrears, bought new winter boots for Lena, even got a prepaid phone plan that didn't cut out during job interviews. "But more than that," she said, voice catching, "it made me believe in turning corners again, in the idea that maybe bad luck isn't inherited, it's just interrupted." I stared at her, chest tightening. "I don't know how to repay you," she added. "You already have," I said. You brought her back smiling. After they left, I stayed in the room long after the sun dipped behind the buildings. The scent of bread lingered in the corners, and Lena's drawing waved slightly in the breeze from the cracked window. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the now empty envelope that once held the ticket. I folded it twice and slipped it into the wooden box in my apartment, next to letters, photos, and old recipes faded at the edges. The drawer didn't just hold memories anymore. It held transitions. Jeremy arrived late the next morning, still dusted with flour from prepping at the bakery he'd started apprenticing at. He dropped 2 croissants on the table and held up his flour-caked hands like a surgeon about to scrub in. "You won't believe what they're paying me to roll butter," he said. "Turns out dough respects redemption." I chuckled and poured us both coffee. He smelled like yeast and effort. We sat in comfortable quiet for a while, until he broke it. "I want to write about this place," he said. "Not for clicks or followers, just something honest. Something that explains how a red hat and a loaf of bread rebuilt a family." "You sure it's not too sentimental?" I asked. He grinned. "Sentiment's just truth, with softened edges." I nodded. "Then make sure you spell my name right." Later that week, Marcus showed up with a new sign for the bread room, hand-carved, varnished, hung with twine. It simply said, "Room for warmth. If your hands are cold, let them hold something soft. If your heart is tired, let it rest here a while." I ran my fingers along the letters. "You made this?" He shrugged. "I watched you make something from nothing. Least I could do is return the favor." I nailed it above the doorway with quiet ceremony. From then on, people entered differently, as if the sign gave them permission to want something more than just food. 2 days later, a man I'd never seen before stood by the shelf, staring at a half loaf like it held an answer. I offered it to him. He took it slowly and said, "I just lost my mother. She always made walnut bread. I came here hoping I'd smell her again." I handed him a napkin-wrapped slice and said, "Then you're exactly where you need to be." That night, I lit a candle in my apartment, not for grief, but for gratitude. I placed it beside the envelope drawer and watched the flame flicker across all that had changed. My life was smaller than it once was, but deeper, like soil that had been turned after frost, ready again for roots. The bread room was quieter now that the cold had truly set in. Snow dusted the windowsills like sifted sugar, and the scent of orange peel and nutmeg lingered long after the loaves cooled. I stood at the table, placing slices into parchment, fingers a little slower these days, not from age, though that played its part, but from something gentler, a slowing that comes when life stops demanding urgency and starts offering rhythm. The bell above the door chimed, a soft note against the hush. Jeremy stepped in first, holding a thermos in one hand and a bright scarf in the other. His cheeks were red from the wind, and he wore that sheepish smile I'd grown fond of again. Behind him, to my quiet surprise, came Marin. She looked taller, or maybe just steadier. Her coat was puffy and pink, dotted with sewn-on stars. She waved as soon as she saw me, as if no time had passed at all. "You came," I said, my voice catching like it had tripped over its own heart. She insisted. Jeremy said, eyes darting to me with soft gratitude, said, "Cinnamon smells like you." Marin rushed over and wrapped her arms around my waist. "I missed your kitchen," she said, muffled into my sweater, "and your moon song." I knelt to her height and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Well," I said, "the kitchen's gotten better at keeping warm, and the moon's been waiting for your voice." She giggled. We set to work quickly, Marin rolling out dough with the tiny pin Jeremy had brought from home, Jeremy slicing oranges for zest, and me guiding them like a conductor with a very small, very messy orchestra. "I told Dad I wanted to make the big bread," Marin said, eyes wide with seriousness. Jeremy looked up. "She means the one with the braid." I smiled. "Shala. That's the one. She thinks it's magic." She's not wrong. As the bread baked, we sat around the table, 3 chairs, one too low but no one cared. "I've been writing more," Jeremy said, sipping from the thermos. "About you, about this place, about what it means to be held by something small." I tilted my head. "Held?" He nodded. "Like how this room holds people without asking anything in return. That's what bread does," I said. "It fills without demanding." Marin scrunched her nose. "Does that mean I don't have to do dishes?" I laughed. "Nice try, Moon Girl." After we cleaned up, Marin found the jar of old buttons I kept on the shelf. It started as a teaching jar, each color for a mood, red for strong, blue for sad, green for brave. "Today I'm yellow," she said, holding up a soft golden one. "For light." I blinked slowly. She handed it to me. "You keep it, Grandma, in case you ever feel dark again." My fingers closed around it. "Thank you, love." Jeremy watched us silently, his eyes glistening. That's when I realized something had changed. He wasn't visiting anymore. He was returning. That evening, once they'd gone, I sat at the kitchen table with the yellow button in my palm. It was chipped at the edge and a little dulled with time, but it radiated something warm. Not light exactly, more like permission. Permission to hope again. To keep forgiving, without erasing. To stay open, even when the world closed in. I placed it inside the wooden box, next to the letter for Marin and the now empty envelope from the lottery ticket. Each piece of the box told a story, and none of them had ended. Later, I walked to the pier. The wind had grown bitter, but I needed the breath, the kind that only came when your lungs were full of salt and sky. I stood where I always stood, hands braced on the railing. The ocean roared softly, as if murmuring secrets it didn't want to keep. I pulled out a small notebook from my coat, the one Marcus had given me. I opened to a blank page and wrote, "Today, my granddaughter gave me a yellow button to hold back the dark. She doesn't know she saved me with it, but she will. Someday." I closed the notebook and pressed it to my chest. Sometimes, the smallest things are what we remember most. The next morning, I baked the challah again, this time with a new twist, crushed pistachios in the braid. As I carried it to the bread room, I passed a man with a sleeping bag tucked under his arm. He looked up at me, wary but curious. "You hungry?" I asked. He didn't answer, just nodded once. I handed him the loaf. His fingers trembled as he held it. "No one's handed me something warm in months," he whispered. "Well," I said, "take it before it cools. Warmth's not meant to wait." He gave me a look I can't quite describe. Something between thank you and disbelief. Then he walked on. I watched him go, until he vanished down the hill. That loaf would likely be eaten in silence, maybe on the curb, maybe with nothing but air to drink. But it was given with care. And sometimes, that's enough. I didn't expect the letter. Not anymore. Not after things had softened. Not after I'd stopped checking the mailbox with that flicker of dread. But there it was. No return address, just my name in careful cursive, folded thick more than a card, less than a packet. I opened it with the same caution I once used to hold newborn Marin, afraid of tearing something fragile. Inside were two things, a note written in Jeremy's handwriting, and a folded piece of Marin's school worksheet, her name written at the top in bright marker, little hearts dotting each I. I read his words slowly. "Mom, I told Marin the truth about the lottery ticket. Not the whole thing, just enough to show her what giving can look like. She didn't ask why you gave it away. She asked what the woman looked like when you did. She said, Grandma probably looked like sunlight, pretending not to be proud. That's when I knew she sees you clearer than I ever did. Thank you for teaching her that kindness isn't always loud. That sometimes it's something you hand over quietly and never mention again. Love, Jeremy." I placed the worksheet gently on the table and touched Marin's name with the tip of my finger. The next morning, I brought down the wooden box. I hadn't opened it in weeks. It had become sacred, less of a container and more of a monument to what had changed. But something tugged at me now, asking for air. I spread everything out on the table, in the bread room. The yellow button, the old envelope, the original lottery ticket receipt, the folded letters from Gloria's daughter Delia, and even one of Marcus's poems scrawled on the back of a bread bag. Each piece whispered its part in the story. I added something new to the collection. A photo Marcus had taken last week, of me, Jeremy, and Marin, in front of the bread sign. The three of us, smiling. No one pretending, no one flinching. Just light, and flower, and togetherness. For a moment, I considered sealing the box, locking it, keeping it just as it was. But then someone knocked. It was the man I'd handed the pistachio challah loaf to a few days earlier, the one with the sleeping bag and hollow cheeks. He stood in the doorway, cleaner this time, but still guarded. "I wasn't sure if you'd remember," he said. "I remember everyone who walks through this door." He stepped inside, hands tucked into a borrowed coat. "I wanted to say thank you," he said. "The bread, it got me through more than just hunger." I gestured to the bench and poured him a cup of coffee. "You know," he added after a long sip, "I've been clean, 14 days. The shelter's helping me look for work. They said if I stay on track, I could start part-time next month." My eyes burned. "I think it started when someone handed me something warm," he said, "and didn't ask for anything back." I nodded. Sometimes we need to be reminded we're still part of the world. He reached into his coat and placed a small coin on the table, an old, dull subway token. "My dad gave this to me when I turned 16. Told me it was for when I wanted to run away, or run home. I used it too many times to count. But now, I think it belongs with you." I took it in both hands. "Thank you," I said. "I'll keep it safe." After he left, I placed the token in the wooden box. Not as memorabilia, but as a marker, a new story, folded in, with the others. Then, I did something I hadn't done since this all began. I wrote my own letter, to whoever opens this box someday. This isn't a collection, it's a map. Every scrap in here marks a place where a choice was made, a choice to heal instead of hide, to give instead of guard, to listen instead of lecture. If you're reading this, I hope you're not looking for answers. I hope you're looking for a place to begin. Because kindness, I've learned, doesn't end at the door. It travels, sometimes in bread, sometimes in buttons, sometimes in silence. Keep it going. Hey. I folded it and placed it at the top of the box. Not to be sealed this time, just kept open, because maybe the point was never to store memories. Maybe it was to let others borrow them. Later that evening, Marcus returned. I saw the man with the coin, he said, sitting down beside me. He left a piece of himself, I replied. Seems like you're building something more than bread, he said. I shook my head. I'm just making space. People bring the rest. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small printed booklet, cream-colored, bound with twine. I printed 10 of these, he said. Poems from the bread room. Some of mine, some yours. One from Marin. I took it with both hands. Would you mind, he asked, if we left a copy on each table at the shelter? No, I said. In fact, that's exactly where they belong. That night, as the wind whistled through the alley, I stepped onto the back stoop with the photo of me and Marin tucked into my pocket. The moon was full, bright enough to read by. I closed my eyes and listened. Not to the city, but to the soft, steady rhythm that had taken root inside me over these last few months. It didn't beat like a drum anymore. It breathed. Snow fell again overnight. Fine, dry flakes that turned the rooftops into powdered sugar and made the streets quiet with that certain kind of reverence winter brings. I woke before dawn, not from restlessness but from a sense that something was finishing. Not ending. No, just finishing. There's a difference. I put on my coat, then my boots, then finally the red wool hat. I caught myself in the mirror briefly, tightly coiled gray curls soft against my face, eyes still piercing despite the fine lines that now embraced them like gentle parentheses. And I smiled. A real one. The kind that doesn't need permission. I arrived at the bread room before sunrise. The street lamps were still humming. The window had frosted at the corners, but inside it smelled of rosemary and rye. Marcus had already been by. A new note sat on the table in his handwriting. Don't wait for anyone to say it. You've already changed everything. Underneath, he'd left another stack of printed booklets, each tied with fresh twine. The cover now bore a photo, not of me but of the bread loaves on the shelf, and a small hand reaching for one. I placed the note inside the wooden box. That, too, belonged to the record now. At 8 a.m., Delia arrived with Lena again. The girl burst through the door holding a piece of folded paper, cheeks flushed from cold. I wrote a poem, she declared before even removing her scarf. Oh? May I hear it? She unfolded the paper and cleared her throat with theatrical flair. There is a lady made of bread, who puts the sad right back to bed. Her hat is red, her heart is too. She makes the world feel warm and new. I had to cover my mouth to stop from crying. Delia looked at me, laughing softly. She practiced all week. She has a gift, I whispered. A voice I hope the world listens to. Lena beamed and tucked the paper into my apron. It's for your box. I added it without hesitation. Jeremy came by later, with Marin. The girl wore a yellow dress over leggings and had braided her own hair, badly. She looked like sunshine that had decided to walk around in human form. I brought something for the wall, she said. It was a photo, printed on glossy paper, the three of us, me, Jeremy and her, taken from the back, standing in the bread room, looking at the shelves, bread in front of us, light all around. You're the roots, Jeremy said. I looked at him. And you? We're just the bloom. He hung the photo beside the others, slightly crooked, perfectly human. We served a lot of bread that day, some to people I knew, some to strangers whose names I never learned. All of them left with something warm in their hands, and if I did it right, something warmer in their hearts. In the early afternoon, an older man came in. He had a deep scar over one eyebrow and wore a coat so patched it looked like a map. He didn't take bread, just stared at the shelves. I don't want to forget how kindness looks, he said. That's why I'm here. I nodded. Then take your time. He stayed for nearly an hour, then left without a word. But I saw him fold something into the donation jar on the way out. Later that evening, I opened it and found a photograph, black and white, worn at the edges, of a woman standing beside a bread cart, smiling. On the back, it said, "My mother, 1948. She fed the hungry in Prague. I placed it in the box. At dusk, I walked to the pier one last time that season. The sea was churning softly, a low, restless rhythm. I brought the wooden box with me, not to leave it behind, just to sit with it, beside the water, and let it breathe. I opened the lid and read each letter again, touched each token, held the yellow button up to the sky like a talisman. When I closed the lid, I felt no weight, only fullness. Back at the apartment, I placed the box under the bed, not hidden, just resting. Then I sat at my small kitchen table, wrote a fresh recipe card, this one for lemon thyme loaf, and tucked it into an envelope. The envelope simply said, "For the next hands who need something warm." I left it in the bedroom that night. No name, no instructions, just presence.